I'm a 28-year-old woman, and I live alone. I've lived alone for most of my adult life, and I want to say that up front because I think it matters. When you live alone, you develop a kind of internal radar. You know exactly how your space is supposed to look and feel and smell at any given time. You know where you left your shoes. You know which cabinet you opened last. You know how the air is supposed to feel when you walk through the door. It's not something you think about consciously. It's more like a background process running in your head at all times. And when something disrupts that process, even something tiny, you feel it before you can name it. About 2 years ago, I moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a converted house in a mid-sized town in upstate New York. The house had been split into 3 units. There was one on the ground floor, mine on the second, and a smaller attic unit on the third. The building was old but maintained well enough. Hardwood floors, tall windows, radiator heat. The landlord was a guy named Gerald who looked to be in his early 60s. He had gray hair and a neatly trimmed mustache, and he always wore these khaki pants with a tucked-in polo shirt like he was about to go play golf. He seemed nice enough during the walkthrough. He told me he owned 4 properties in the area and managed them all himself. No property management company, no maintenance crew. Just Gerald. He said it like he was proud of it. I signed the lease that same week. The rent was reasonable and the place had good natural light, which was important to me because I work from home as a freelance graphic designer. Most of my days were spent at my desk in the living room, which I'd set up near the biggest window. I had a decent routine. Wake up around 7, coffee, work until noon, lunch, more work until 5 or 6. Then I'd cook something and watch whatever show I was into at the time. It was a quiet life, but I liked it. I'd come from a loud, chaotic household growing up, so the silence was something I actually chose. The first month was uneventful. Gerald came by once to fix a leaky faucet in the kitchen. He let himself in with his key while I was at my desk. I didn't hear him come in. I just looked up, and he was standing in my kitchen doorway holding a wrench. I must have visibly flinched because he laughed and said he'd knocked, but I must not have heard him. I told him I'd appreciate a text before he came in. He said, "Sure, no problem." I didn't think much of it. Landlords have keys. That's just how it works. The second month is when the background process in my brain started pinging. It started with something so small, I almost feel stupid mentioning it. I came home from the grocery store one evening and walked into the apartment, and immediately something felt different. I couldn't place it at first. I put the bags down, looked around the living room, checked the kitchen. Everything looked normal. But there was a smell, not a bad smell. It was like soap. Clean, slightly floral soap. The kind you'd smell in someone's bathroom, not mine. I used unscented everything because strong scents give me headaches. I stood there in my kitchen for a full minute just breathing through my nose, trying to figure out if I was imagining it. I checked the bathroom. Nothing out of place. I checked the windows, all locked. I told myself it was probably drifting in from one of the other units through the vents and moved on with my evening. A few days later, I was getting ready for bed, and I noticed my bathroom towel was damp, not soaking wet, but noticeably damp. I hadn't showered since that morning. It was almost 11 at night. A towel that had been used 12 hours ago should have been dry by then. I touched it again just to make sure. Definitely damp, particularly the middle section, like someone had used it to dry their hands or their face. I stood there holding the towel, and I remember this weird feeling settling over me. Not fear exactly, more like confusion with an edge to it. I hung the towel back up and checked the apartment. Front door was locked, windows locked. Nothing missing, nothing moved. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep well. Over the next few weeks, these micro-disturbances kept happening. A kitchen chair slightly pulled out from the table when I knew I'd pushed it in. A cushion on the couch that was dented like someone had been sitting on it. The toilet seat up. That one really bothered me because I live alone and I'm a woman. I never leave the toilet seat up. Ever. But there it was, up. In the middle of a Tuesday when I'd been out for maybe 3 hours running errands, I started to wonder if I was losing it. That's what happens when the disturbances are this small. You can't prove anything to anyone, not even to yourself. You start building these little rationalizations. Maybe I bumped the chair on my way out. Maybe I sat weird on the couch. Maybe I did leave the toilet seat up for some reason I can't remember. The human brain will do backflips to avoid accepting something frightening. I know that now. The thing that shifted everything was the food. I'm very particular about my groceries. I do one big shop a week and I know exactly what I have. I meal prep on Sundays and portion things out. It's a system. One Wednesday evening, I opened the fridge to grab the container of leftover pasta I'd made 2 days earlier. The container was there, right where I'd left it, but it was lighter than it should have been. I popped the lid. There was noticeably less pasta than I remembered. Not empty, not half gone, just less. Like someone had eaten a serving and put the container back. I stared at it for a long time. I checked the trash for a fork or a plate or any sign that I'd eaten it and forgotten. Nothing. I hadn't touched it since I'd put it in there. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay in bed with every light in the apartment on, listening to every creak and tick of the old building. My brain was cycling through explanations. Was I sleepwalking? Was I having some kind of memory issue? Was I going crazy? The one explanation I didn't want to consider was the one that made the most sense. Someone was coming into my apartment. The next day, I bought a cheap security camera from a big box store, one of those small ones that connects to your phone. I set it up on a bookshelf in my living room, angled toward the front door, and I didn't tell anyone about it. For over a week, nothing. I checked the footage obsessively, scrubbing through hours of an empty apartment. I started to feel foolish, and then on a Friday morning, I left at 10 to meet a friend for coffee. I was gone for about 2 hours. When I got home, I checked the camera. My heart nearly stopped. At 10:47 a.m., 47 minutes after I'd left, my front door opened. No knock, no hesitation. A key turned in the lock, and the door swung open and Gerald walked in. He was wearing his usual khaki pants and polo shirt. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and just stood there in my living room for a moment. Then he walked to the kitchen. He opened the fridge. He stood there looking into it for about 15 seconds, then closed it. He walked to the bathroom. I couldn't see what he did in there because the camera only covered the living room, but he was in there for almost 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Then he came back out, walked to my bedroom door, and went in. He was in my bedroom for almost 7 minutes. I was watching this on my phone, sitting in my parked car outside the building. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. When he finally came out of my bedroom, he walked back through the living room, let himself out the front door, and locked it behind him. The whole visit lasted just under 15 minutes. He moved through my apartment like it was his own. There was no urgency, no nervousness. He wasn't looking for a maintenance issue. He wasn't checking on anything. He was just there, being in my space, using my things, existing in my home like he belonged there. I sat in that car for 20 minutes trying to figure out what to do. My first instinct was to call the police, but I kept second-guessing myself. He's the landlord. He has a key. He technically owns the building. Would the police even take this seriously? He didn't break anything. He didn't steal anything as far as I could tell. But 4 minutes in my bathroom, 7 minutes in my bedroom. What was he doing in there? I called my older sister. She told me to get out immediately and stay with her until I figured out my next move. I told her I needed to think. She told me there was nothing to think about. She was right, but I wasn't ready to accept how bad the situation actually was yet. That evening, I went through the apartment more carefully than I ever had before. I started with the bathroom. I opened the hamper. My dirty clothes were in there, same as always, but they were folded. I never fold clothes before putting them in the hamper. No one does. They were folded neatly, stacked, like someone had gone through them, looked at each piece, and put them back in an organized way. I felt physically sick. I sat on the bathroom floor with my back against the tub and just breathed for a while. In the bedroom, I checked the closet, the dresser, the windowsill. My dresser drawers were closed. But the bottom drawer, the one where I keep things like old journals and personal documents and a few pieces of clothing I don't wear often, was slightly open, maybe a 1/4 inch, just enough to notice if you were really looking. I opened it. Everything was still in there, but the order was wrong. I keep my journals on the left side. They were on the right. Whoever had been in this drawer had looked through it and put things back, but not exactly how they'd been. I packed a bag that night and went to my sister's. I also went back through the camera footage from the previous days. The camera had a motion detection feature that I'd turned on, and it stored clips in the cloud. I found 6 more entries, 6 in the span of just under 2 weeks. Gerald had been letting himself into my apartment an average of every other day, always within an hour of me leaving, always staying between 10 and 20 minutes, always going to the same 3 places: kitchen, bathroom, bedroom. But the footage from the very first recorded entry is the one that made me feel like the floor had dropped out from under me. I'd only been reviewing footage from times I was out of the apartment. It never occurred to me to check footage from when I was home. Why would it? But that night at my sister's, I scrubbed through everything, and there it was. It was from the first day I had the camera set up, a day I was home the entire time. I was at my desk working with headphones on. At 2:14 in the afternoon, the front door opened. Gerald stepped inside. He stood in the doorway and looked directly at me sitting at my desk, maybe 15 feet away. I had my back to the door and my headphones on. He watched me for 9 seconds. I counted 9 seconds of him standing in my doorway, staring at the back of my head while I worked, completely unaware. Then he quietly stepped back out and closed the door without a sound. He came into my apartment while I was home, and I never knew. I showed my sister the footage that night. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she told me I was never going back to that apartment alone, not even to pack. I agreed. I filed a police report the next day. The officer I spoke to was sympathetic, but told me that landlord-tenant access disputes were complicated and that unless I could prove he entered with intent to commit a crime, it would likely be treated as a civil matter. He recommended I document everything and consult a lawyer about breaking the lease. That was it. I showed him the footage of a man entering my home without permission, going through my things, watching me without my knowledge, and the advice was to consult a lawyer. I stayed at my sister's for 4 days before we went back together to start packing my things. I hadn't set foot in the apartment since the night I left. My sister had taken the day off work, and she brought her boyfriend too, just in case Gerald showed up. He didn't. His truck wasn't even in the lot. We started in the living room and kitchen, boxing up the easy stuff. I was moving fast because I didn't want to be in that space any longer than I had to. My sister went into the bedroom to start on the closet while I finished wrapping dishes. After about 20 minutes, she called my name from the bedroom. Not loud, not panicked, just my name, once, in this flat tone that immediately made my stomach drop. I walked in and she was standing at the foot of my bed, staring down at it. She didn't look at me. She just pointed at the far side of the bed, the side against the wall, the side I never sleep on, and said, "Did you sleep on that side before you left?" I looked. The pillow on the far side had a clear impression in it, a head-shaped indent pressed deep into the center, the way a pillow looks after someone has been lying on it for a while, not just resting their head briefly. Someone had lain on that pillow long enough for the foam to compress and hold the shape. I hadn't slept in that apartment in 4 days. I hadn't slept on that side of the bed ever. I sleep on the right side, closest to the door. I've always slept on the right side. The left pillow was decorative. I never even moved it. My sister looked at me. I could see she already understood, but she was waiting for me to say it. I couldn't. I just shook my head. She leaned closer to the pillow and then stopped. On the pillowcase, pressed into the fabric near the center of the impression, there was a single hair. Gray, slightly coarse. It was curled in the way hair curls when it falls naturally from someone's head while they're lying down. I recognized it immediately, not the specific hair, obviously, but the color, the texture. I'd seen Gerald's hair plenty of times, that neatly trimmed gray hair he kept combed to the side with his polo shirts and his khaki pants and his keyring full of keys to other people's homes. My sister stepped back from the bed and walked out of the room. I heard her on the phone in the hallway. I think she was calling the police. I just stood there staring at that indent in the pillow next to where I used to sleep. My mind was doing something I can only describe as rewinding. Every single night I'd spent in that bed. Every night I'd fallen asleep with my headphones in, or with the TV on low, or in complete silence. The camera footage already proved he came in while I was awake at my desk. He stood in the doorway and watched me for 9 seconds, and I never knew. That was during the day, while I was sitting up, while I was conscious, while I was 15 feet away in another room. But the pillow wasn't in the living room. It wasn't near the doorway. It was in my bed, on the pillow next to mine. And the footage showed he spent 7 minutes in my bedroom every single visit. He didn't just watch me from the doorway while I worked. He lay down next to me while I slept. I don't know how many times. I don't know if it was every visit or just some of them. I don't know what he did while he was there, lying inches from me in the dark while I breathed and turned over and had no idea another person was in my bed. The camera only covered the living room. Everything past the bedroom doorway was out of frame. I will never know what happened in that room on the nights I was asleep and he had the key. And when I checked the camera footage from the 4 days I'd been staying at my sister's, I found 2 more entries. He came back, even after I'd left, even with most of my things still there and the apartment half empty. He let himself in, walked to the bedroom, and stayed for almost 20 minutes. The pillow impression wasn't old. It was from the day before we came to pack. My sister's boyfriend helped me pack the rest of the apartment in under an hour. I didn't go back into the bedroom. They handled it. I sat on the front steps and waited. I broke the lease that week and Gerald had the nerve to send me an invoice for the early termination fee. I never paid it. I also found out from the previous tenant, a woman I managed to track down through a mutual friend, that she had moved out suddenly too. She didn't want to talk about why at first, but when I told her what happened to me, she went quiet for a long time. Then she said she used to wake up some mornings and feel like her sheets had been disturbed. She said she'd find the comforter pulled slightly to one side, or a crease in the fitted sheet that didn't match how she'd been lying. She told herself she was a restless sleeper. She said she never looked into it further because the alternative was too disturbing to consider. I don't know how many tenants Gerald did this to. I don't know how long he'd been doing it. I don't know if he escalated with anyone else or if he's still doing it to whoever lives in that apartment now. I reported him to the local housing authority and gave them copies of the footage. As far as I know, nothing came of it. I looked up the property records a few months later, and Gerald still owned the building. I've been in my new apartment for over a year now. The first thing I did when I moved in was ask the landlord how many copies of the key existed and who had access. I installed my own deadbolt with the landlord's written permission. I have cameras in every room now, not just the living room. I check them every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. I know that's not a normal way to live. I know it sounds excessive. But some nights I still wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning for no reason. No noise, no nightmare, nothing I can point to. Just this sudden alertness, like my body is responding to something my conscious mind can't detect. And every single time, the first thing I do is turn my head and look at the pillow next to me. It's always empty, but I don't think I'll ever stop checking.